My name is Katja Mihurko-Ponish, and I am coordinator of the CIPUS Network, Women Writers in History, and chair of the Cultural and Tourist Association, Women Writers Route. I cordially welcome you at the joint event of the aforementioned network and the Forum of Slavic Cultures. The initiator of the project, Women Writers Route, has been Dr. Andrea Richter, a director of the Forum of Slavic Cultures, where the project also has started. Dr. Richter, I warmly welcome you at our event, and I would kindly ask you to greet the participants.
Hello to everybody. Thank you, Katja. Thank you for all of you that you join this meeting, better presentation of our first book. I'm in the middle, somewhere in Europe, very difficult for me to be with you all the time. You see that I'm wearing the mask, but it's the way of life today. Thank you very much again, Katja, to you as our president of association, and the lot of energy and effort that you invest in our route. Thank you, all of you, my dear colleagues, friends, I may say, that you participate in this catalog. End of last year, we started with official association. Now it's March, end of March perhaps, and we have the first book. I think this is a very good way to prepare our application end of July, I hope the beginning of July, to the Institute of Culture Roots in Europe. Thank you, Matea. She's with us all the time, and to all my colleagues in the Forum of Slavic Culture that support our route. But thank you, all of you, that you are with us. And I'm very, very positive and full of energy that our route will have a future, not only with the women, but also with the men with us. Thank you very much again, and a good presentation. Katja, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Andrea Richter, for these inspiring words. In the next half an hour, we will present the route, but also the publication, the first outcome of the project. And I will then give a floor to the co-editors of the volume, Professor Dr. Biljana Dojčinović and Assistant Professor Dr. Masha Grdesić. But first, let me present the project Women Writers Route and share the presentation. Okay. So here we have the presentation. So first, what are the cultural roots at all? They are launched by the Council of Europe, first in the year 1987, and the cultural roots demonstrate by means of journey through space and time how the heritage of the different countries and cultures in Europe contributes to a shared and living cultural heritage. As you see here, I pasted some images from the websites of the roots, and there are now 40 existing cultural roots, and they often address, as this one, Transromanica, a certain period in the European cultural history, such as here, as I said, Romanesque in the root Transromanica, but also important persons such as a composer, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, or writers such as the writer Robert Louis Stevenson Root. However, no cultural root is dedicated to female persons. Even though there are many female saints, we have just Saint Martin's root. Obviously, one of the 20 United Nations and UNESCO goals, development goals, goal number 5, which is to achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls, has not been taken much in the consideration by the proposers of the roots. Therefore, in our project, we put, of course, women in the foreground. Now let's take a look what are the objectives of the European Council's cultural roots. First goal is to raise awareness of European culture through travel. The second is the setting up networks for tourism connected with the cultural geography of Europe. And last but not least, of course, is that a cultural route should promote the major sites and crossroads of European civilization as places of interest to tourists. So which areas and which institutions are usually included in the cultural route? Let's start with the cultural institutions, because Forum of Slavic Cultures is, of course, cultural institution, but very important are also for supporting the networks and the routes, academia, education institutions, and of course also research institutions. Then local associations are also very important, especially tourist guides associations. Then, of course, gastronomy is also an important partner in the projects, in the cultural roots. We have cafes about famous or very famous writers or artists spend a lot of their time, or perhaps a cake dedicated to a certain person, artist, or whatever. Then, of course, when we develop all on our culture route, then creative industries are also very important. So what is also then very important is that in the first phase, we have to reach and attract different cultural institutions which are then partners in the project. So these cultural institutions are very often museums, and we are very happy that our partner in the project is the museum dedicated to the Croatian writer Ivana Brlić-Mažuranić, and this museum is a very active partner in our project. But also other tangible and intangible artifacts on the from the heritage, cultural heritage, are very important. So perhaps the statue, here we have the statue in Zagreb, then perhaps a memorial plaque or monument at the cemetery. So everything we can include, or even perhaps when we walk in the city or in the town, then we are in some street named perhaps or dedicated to a woman writer. The starting point of this project is, however, that women writers shaped the cultural map of the Europe throughout the history, but their contributions have often been overlooked or underestimated. In many Slavic countries, women writers entered the literary field not earlier than in the 19th century, and therefore we decided that we first focus on the long 19th century. This does not mean that we are not interested in the foremothers or successors of women writers included now in the route. It's just that so far we have paid special attention to those writers who were pioneers in the Slavic literatures, but we hope, and we of course also plan, that writers from other periods and literatures will be part of the route soon in the future. In the first phase of the project, we decided to focus on following representatives from Slavic literatures. I think that you know most of them, but let me name them. Anna Akhmatova, Marina Tsvetaeva, Zinaida Gipius from Russian literature, then Zofka Kveder and Lili Novi from Slovenian. Then we have Maria Juric Zagorka, a Croatian writer, then Slovenian writer Ljubka Šorli. Then we have three writers from Serbian literature, Jelena Dimitrijević, Izidora Sekulić, and Desanka Maksimović. Then very important and also very well known Polish woman writer, Maria Konopnicka. Then a writer that I have already mentioned, Ivana Brlić-Mažuranić, and the Bulgarian writer Yelisaveta Bagarieva. So what has to be done to obtain the certificate? First, we have to know that obtaining the certificate of the cultural root of the Council of Europe is a durable and complex process that requires an active participation and collaboration of all organs of a network and its constitutive bodies. Therefore, we first established two constitutive bodies. So we have a scientific council and we also have a program council. But even more important than just to have these councils is, of course, to organize the events. So the scientific and, of course, to attract the partners. And here are some partners of our network. And now, and of course, not to forget our CIPUS network, which is also important because it is important to organize activities for pupils, for students, and of course, a network of academic institutions and university is an important partner. But as I have just mentioned, it is important that the scientific council, but also, of course, program council organized different activities. So 2 years ago, we organized a conference in Ljubljana, and here you see our Polish colleagues presenting their paper about Maria Konopnicka. Another good way to promote women writers are also literary walks, and of course also round tables and literary evenings and these kind of events. And all this led, as Dr. Richter has already mentioned, to a very important step in the project, to the establishment of the Culture and Tourist Association Women Writers Route, which is registered in accordance with regulations in Slovenia. Therefore, you see here Slovenian document, because in Slovenia, the association is also formally situated. All partners and activities are now also formally joined under the same roof, and we are looking forward to the realization of the exciting and attractive activities listed in the program of the project, and of course, as also already mentioned, the application, the submission of the application in July this year. We also see as a very important achievement of the project the volume, defined trajectories. And with this, I'm concluding my presentation and I'm giving the floor to one of the editors, to my dear colleague, Dr. Masha Gardesic.
Thank you, Katja. I will try to share the screen now. Just a second. Give me a moment. I'm not sure why it's not sharing. Can you see it?
No, it's white. Perhaps you have to share your browser. I don't know what you want, or PowerPoint.
I was going to share my browser. I'm so sorry.
So this is then, I think, advanced. You have to go to the advanced share screen and then advanced, and then you will find your browser probably.
Okay.
Hi, everyone.
Hello, Nadia.
Hi.
Okay. Is it still not showing?
Now we see it.
Can you see the table of content?
Yes, yes.
I'm so sorry. Okay, so as you can see, there are 6 articles on Slavic women writers in this volume, which we have named Defiant Trajectories, Mapping Out Slavic Women Writers' Roots. And the route was planned out, as Katya already said, to include women authors from the end of the 19th century and from the beginning of the 20th century, because in this period of modernity, women were slowly entering the public sphere in Slavic countries and becoming professional writers. With some exceptions, the 9 writers presented in this volume didn't have a secure place in the literary history and in their national literary canons, but they have been researched in new ways, mostly thanks to feminist literary criticism, even though the writers themselves often had an ambiguous stance towards feminism, as you can see in the articles. So I want to present shortly each of these articles, but I will skip my own and start with Ksenia's article. Ksenia Rakočević writes about Divna Veković, from our author from Montenegro. Let me just find her article. There you go. You can see Divna here in the photo. I really like the way Ksenia Rakočević approached the subject of Divna Veković, starting with the description of Montenegrin culture as a tribal culture, which was, maybe still is, a deeply patriarchal society with the myth of man and God the Father at its center. Ksenia writes that before King Nicola's reign in the second half of the 19th century, women weren't even allowed to sit at the same table as men, and all work that included bending of the spine was done by women because it was considered to be humiliating to men. King Nicola, though, had progressive ideas about women and the education of girls. So Ksenia writes about one such school for girls, the Girls' Institute in Cetinje, and one of their graduates was Divna Veković, who went on to study at the Sorbonne, where she graduated in 1917 with a degree in dentistry, and later became the first woman doctor of philosophy in Montenegro. And Ksenia writes about her primarily as a translator of Montenegrin literature into the French language, and perhaps most importantly, Divna Veković translated the heroic epic poem Mountain Wreath by Petar Petrović Njegoš into French. But unfortunately, very few documents remain to help us piece together Divna Veković's work and life, as is so often the case with women writers. And then the next text comes from our Polish authors. There we go. And it is on the author Maria Konopnicka, which Katya already mentioned, by Monika Rudaš-Grodzka, Katarzyna Nadana Sokolovska, Emilia Kolinko. I apologize for my bad Polish pronunciation. And Maria Konopnicka was a very important figure in Poland in the second half of the 19th century and at the beginning of the 20th century. She was involved in the struggle for Polish liberation, which is why she's often seen as a patriotic figure. But she was also involved for the fight for women's rights, but her relationship to feminism was also a complex one, which was the case for most of our writers. The three authors of this article paint a very compelling portrait of Konopnicka, a popular author whose life and work was appropriated both by conservative and radical political factions in Poland, and she was also seen as both a positivist and a modernist writer. And the authors analyzed several of her works, and for me, the most interesting was her modernist novella, The Sea Departed, which they compare to Death in Venice and to The Lighthouse. And the novella depicts a woman standing at the edge of the sea, full of longing, sadness, and melancholy. And in this way, Konopnicka creates a new modernist sensibility in Polish literature. Konopnicka was also a big traveler, as most of our women writers. She traveled around Europe for almost 20 years with her female companion after leaving her husband, children, and homeland. And similar to other authors in this volume, this was in search of independence and liberty as a woman. And then the next article I want to talk about is by our Russian colleague, Ekaterina Artemiuk. And this article gives us a very different situation and a very different context, I think. Here we have three poets who are world famous and world renowned, and they are some of the greatest poets of Russian literature and world literature. And unlike most of the other women writers in this volume, they have a well-established place in Russian culture with museums, memorials, statues, libraries already dedicated to them. These three poets are, of course, as you can see, Anna Akhmatova, Marina Tsvetaeva, and Zinaida Hippius. All three of them lived in similar turbulent political times. Their lives were marked by personal tragedy, exile, and in the case of Tsvetaeva, suicide. They were forced to endure both the gender discrimination and political persecution. And again, they are presented in this article as fiercely independent women, asserting themselves in public and cultivating friendships with many important contemporary European artists and thinkers. And it's especially interesting to me how both Akhmatova and Tsvetaeva were obsessed with their female ancestors, taking names from their mothers and grandmothers, forging their identities and poetic personas from their female family lineage. And then the next author is Yelena Dimitrievich, but I won't talk to you about her extensively because Biljana will talk more about her. I just want to say that Yelena Dimitrievich was self-educated and fluent in many languages, also a big traveler, and not only to Europe, but also to the United States and Asia. And what's most interesting to me is that everywhere she traveled, Yelena Dimitrievich was primarily interested in lives of women in the countries she went to. So that's also important for us. And then your colleague Katja's text is next on Zofka Kveder. And there it should be here, yes. Katja here takes a different approach. She writes about Zofka Kveder as a cultural icon, which is really interesting to me. Cultural icon primarily from the perspective of her contemporaries, other artists and cultural figures of the time. And Katja analyzes the ways Zofka Kveder appears as a literary character in different works of literature, as a positive, but also as a negative literary character, and analyzes her portrait in the obituaries written after her death. And she also presents Zofka Kveder as a feminist icon in a really compelling way. In her work, Kveder depicts the incompatibility of women's emancipation with marriage and motherhood, and writes about guilt connected to sexuality and the enjoyment of sex. But Katja Michurko-Ponij is very careful not to simplify the complexities of Zofka Kveder's character and her contradictory yearnings, and gives us a very fitting conclusion to her article, as well as the whole volume. And I think it's important that this text is the last text in the volume, because even though she is presenting Zofka Kveder as a cultural icon, she is also emphasizing her contradictory individuality. And I hope something similar can be said about this project as a whole. We are aiming to find connections and similarities between our women writers. and different Slavic national literatures and cultures. But at the same time, we are trying to stay aware of the differences between them and of the importance of taking into account specific cultural and historical context. And then in the end, I just want to say the women authors presented in this volume differ in their cultural status, their place in the national canon, the kind and the quality of their writing, but there are many things that they have in common, like a complex relationship to the political regimes of their countries, a complex relationship to feminist politics, the anxiety of authorship, using pseudonyms or their mother's names instead of their father's names. Many of them were unmarried, whether single, widowed, divorced, and they had a contested relationship to motherhood. They used travel as a way of emancipation and exerting independence. Many of them suffered from mental health issues like depression, and some of them committed suicide, and they shared the experience of exile. And all of this is tied up with their struggle with or against gender roles of their time, their search for freedom and independence in terms of their individual lives, but also as part of a wider collective struggle for national freedom, freedom of women, freedom of peasants, and freedom of the working class. So this is all that I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Masha, for your concise presentation. It is not easy to summarize 100 pages in 10 minutes, but you have done it perfectly. I would also like to add that all the text, the articles in the volume have been peer-reviewed and by to our colleagues, Associate Professor Alenka Jensterle-Doležal and Professor Lyudmila Dimitrov, who is also today with us. So hello, Lyudmila, and thank you very much for your help. And now I would like to invite Biljana. I forgot to mention that Masha is also a member of the Scientific Council, and Biljana is as well. And so we really collaborate very well together in different projects in SIPUS and in the Women Writers Route. And now Biljana is ready, and Biljana, the floor is yours, of course. So Biljana, we see your PowerPoint presentation, but we don't see you or hear you. I still see Masha. Okay. Biljana?
Biljana, I think you should unmute yourself.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, okay. I had such a good start. I'm not sure if I can repeat it that way. I'm very happy to be part of this project and really happy to see this collection finished. I think I enjoyed in the process very much. Here is, I will give a small talk, a short talk about Jelena Dimitrijević, whom a lot of those who are present know something about, I think, because I spoke about her on many occasions. But she's maybe the right person to talk about in the end of our first part of this presentation, because in some way she is the embodiment of a woman traveler, I would say. She traveled around the world, as Masha said. She was one of the first travelers from, maybe even the first traveler from Serbia to United States. And she was one who would always bring something new and speak about something that she saw in a very confident and very interesting way. Also, the thing that Jelena Dimitrijević is present in this women's route, I'm very glad about that, because initially there were only Isidora Sekulić and Desanka Maksimović who had been one of the few figures in our literary canon that are mentioned mostly. Actually, when we think about the school textbooks for the primary school, for instance, you would only find Isidora Sekulic and Desanka Maksimovic there, and maybe in some occasions, I think another writer, Grozdana Olovic. So Jelena Dimitrijević entered school program for the 7th grade in the primary school recently, maybe less than 2 years ago. And we are all in our project Knjiženstvo very happy about that, because that's a kind of a breakthrough. And I think that the projects such as Women Writers Route would help to maintain that position, and would bring this consciousness about the need to know about women writers in our culture and in our cultures, in Slavic cultures at the first place, because they are very important part of our cultures, and they should not be forgotten and should not be overlooked. And I think that Women Writers Route could do a lot for Jelena Dimitrijević and other writers too, to make us aware of them and help us build institutions, and maybe just even just focusing on them, maybe even just memorial benches or memorial plaques would be enough to make these important steps for us to go back to our cultures and to our roots in the right way. What you see here is the bust of Jelena Dimitrijević in Niš. That's the city at the south of Serbia, which we hope that would take part in the Women Writers Route, because Jelena Dimitrijević spent there many years. She was married when she was 19, and then she moved from Aleksinac to Niš, and spent in Niš a long time with her husband. She's also one of the exceptions in that long line of women with many problems, in unhappy marriages, traveling around to be free. She was very happily married for 30 years. And then she became a widow for another 30 years. And she always wrote very warmly about her husband and the time that they spent together. And in her one of her travelogues, you could see that he was very, very supportive to her. So in a way, she differs from most of the writers when we talk about, in general, about women writers. But, you know, exceptions just confirm the rule, it seems so. There are many travelogues she wrote. The first one I consider to be Letters from Niš about harems, although she was not traveling from the city where she lived at the time, and I call it a sedentary travelogue, but she explored places that were not easily open to other people, especially male people or people who were not who were not Muslims, because these were the harems. And she was so keen to learn about her neighbors. She came to Niš very briefly after it was liberated from Turks, and she was very interested in the culture and lives of women in harems. And this is what this travelogue is more like a novel than like something that was written from a journey, but it's one journey in depth of the city. What you see here is the table in the street of Jelena Dimitrijević in Niš, and she lived in that street. This is not her house, it's on the other end of this street. But the memory about Jelena Dimitrijević is taken care of in in
We have to.
is everything okay? Can I go on?
Yes, please.
Okay, so there is a street, and there is this bust of Yelena Dimitrievich, and if our women writers route concentrates on niche when the memory about Yelena Dimitrievich is at stake, I'm sure that there will be more memorabilia in that city, and that it would make the city more attractive for the visitors. Here's just the title page of one of the editions of that travelogue, and this is the actual building which was used for the title page. What you see here is an article about Yelena Dimitrievich's house in Belgrade. It's in Belgrade. It's in the center of the Belgrade, and this was pictured during one of our walks, Gynocentrics walks, which we, as the project Knjiženstvo, would occasionally organize. So here we are in front of Yelena Dimitrievich's home, where she spent like more than almost 50 years of her life in Belgrade. And that house does not have a plaque that would remind the people that this great writer and world traveler lived here. So this is one of the things that must be changed. I already mentioned Letters from Salonika, which she wrote in 1908. Interestingly enough, they were, as you can see, translated into English and Italian 3 years ago. And for some reason, I hear that Italian audience is very much interested in some other works by Yelena Dimitrievich, which are about the Orient and her experiences with Muslim women. So what you see here on the left side is the publication which was made to memorize 100 years since this book was first published. Actually in 1908, she published these letters in papers. Then 10 years later, she published them as a book. And in 2008, the Letters from Salonika were republished in Serbian and translated into Greek. So there are 3 translations actually into Greek, English, and Italian of this travelogue. And that travelogue depicts the moment of the Young Turk Revolution in Thessalonica. Again, as Masha already pointed out, she's mostly interested in the fate of women during that revolution. The New World, or A Year in America, has recently been republished, and it's a very, very attractive and maybe my favorite travelogue by Yelena Dimitrievich, or at least it used to be until the last year. You will see why. It's extremely interesting to see how somebody who traveled there right after the World War I, where she lost her husband. You see that the old edition is from 1934, but actually the actual travel into New World happened in 1919, just 1 year after the war was ended, and everything was devastated at that moment. And this is the part of her travel through Europe until the harbor from which she set off to America that I'm also focused in the text, which is in our newly published book now. So this is one very, very attractive, extremely interesting, because it shows the early days of new ways of life in America, which in maybe 20 or 30 years later became also the European experience, like the life of women at the first place. She's interested in the way they are keeping their households without servants, but with appliances, which were so completely new to her that, for instance, she couldn't name a washing machine, because she, you know, there were no words, adequate words in Serbian for such a thing. As Seven Seas and Three Oceans, the first part was also republished. That was first published in 1940. It was her final book. She died 5 years later. In 1941, war started in Yugoslavia, so there were no occasion, it wasn't possible for her to publish anything else. So this is the first part, and this is now in the program for seventh grade children to read about her travel. This first part is about Egypt and some other countries, Syria, for instance. It is very touching to read now how she describes Damascus and Syria. You know, the way how these places look, the way they will never look again. And also important part is her meeting with the Egyptian feminist Hoda Hanum Sharawi, which opened her many doors in these countries at the Near East. And the second part, this is why I said that until last year, the travelogue to the New World used to be my favorite, and it might change because this is Seven Seas and Three Oceans, the second book, which at the Project Niezhenstvo, which Project Niezhenstvo brought to the publication, because it has never been published before. And our great project was to transcribe the manuscript and turn it into the book. And also it's highly interesting travelogue through India mostly. We know that she also traveled to China. There is a small piece devoted to Japan. She also traveled to Ceylon, but this is not recorded in this travelogue. Anyway, it's an extremely interesting, you can see how some places in this manuscript looked. So it wasn't an easy task, but we finished it and we are very proud of it. And now those who read Serbian, they can find it on our webpage of the Project Niezhenstvo, and they can download it and read it. And again and again, I'm always amazed at her ability to see people, to observe, to get to certain places, to draw characters so easily and so convincingly. And she's always tolerant. She's always open to new experiences. She's always benevolent. I would say, again, the embodiment of a woman writer and world traveler. So you can see this cartoon, which very nicely depicts her. I like the facial expression of that cartoon. She's so happy to travel and write. So, and I think this could go for all our for all the writers that we wrote about in our book. So that's it from me.
Thank you, Biljana. Thank you very much. I completely agree with you. It was a very rich presentation, this time focused on her travels and routes, but I know that you could speak about Jelena for hours. Yeah. So I think that you can add something in the discussion, of course. So now it's time to open the discussion. If you have any questions, any comments, we all three are looking forward to hear them. You can, of course, also write in the chat box your question or comment, but you can also, of course, just say it.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm Michelle Lozada, and I would like to thank you for this wonderful event and the ways of presenting and to giving it to to us all. And just wondering if, is there any possibility to have those texts translated into, like, for instance, English, because it would be a huge way of reaching other readers and making a wider audience have the possibility to make comparisons like we did many times ago with the Women Writers in History group. Thank you.
I think this is a question to Biljana about Jelena Dimitrijević.
Yes.
Well, it's not really easy to fulfill that translation task. We have translated recently something that is a part of her American cycle. That means one story and one part of her travelogue the story was based on, and that publication is also on the website. It's called The American Woman, but this was thanks to the fact that a member of our project is a great translator, and he was also technical editor and proofreader of this publication. That's my doctoral student, Goran Petrovic. And I can only thank him for this endeavor. That's really time consuming, and it's difficult to find the means. I know that Vladimir Bošković, he's the translator of the letters to Salonika into English and into Greek. He was a co-translator into Greek, that he also planned maybe 2 or 3 years ago to translate and publish this travelogue to United States by Jelena Dimitrijević, because he's a great admirer of Jelena Dimitrijević's work. And he was trying to crowdfund that project, but obviously did not manage. And I'm very, very sorry for that, because when we started translating this part of the travelogue into English, first I wrote to Vladimir to ask him whether he translated. That's one of the ending parts. It's at the end of the travelogue. And he said, no, I translated only the beginning and didn't go further because he couldn't find the adequate publisher. He was obviously not very happy, or for some reason didn't want to go on with the publisher of the letters from Salonika, or maybe it wasn't their target group, the books which were not about the Orient. And so it's not easy. So when Goran joined Project Književstvo, I was really happy to find somebody who is so good, whose English is so good. And for the time being, I cannot promise anything more, unfortunately. I would really like to have the opportunity to compare Jelena. 2 years ago, when I was in Slovenia, I found out about Alma Karlin. That was very interesting. And of course, I don't speak Slovenian, but I can understand if I'm really keen to learn something. And then we realized that Jelena and Alma almost, or could have met in India in that time. So, and it's so exciting to make such connections, but unfortunately, language is the barrier, and publishing expenses are a barrier, and expenses for translation are a barrier. But this is why we are looking for the projects to be able to fund such things. So I agree with you, Isabel, completely.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you, Biljana, for mentioning Alma Karlin, who is the SIPUS Network Woman Writer of March. And you can find more about her in the article posted now also on the website of our network But unfortunately, her texts are also not translated into English. They are originally actually written in German, but we are still waiting for the English translation, which would be, I think, very interesting for all these comparisons between these authors who traveled around the world. Are there any other questions or comments?
I can also ask Biljana. Thank you very much, Biljana. Nice to hear you again speaking about this, Jelena. I was just wondering, what about her being translated in her own time? Was there any translation? I don't find one in the VRE, only one into Russian.
Yes, there is one into Russian, but I never managed to find that book, actually, The New Women. So I asked some of the Russian colleagues and not so far. And also I have some data about 2 of her stories. If you don't have it in VRE, I will look up again and then send it, or just enter this into the VRE, into Czech, and that's all.
Yeah.
Nothing else that I know or that is written down. So
when going to the United States, she was in contact with other women authors. And,
yes, she was in contact with women authors.
But none of them took any initiative about translating her work.
No, none of them. Interestingly enough, one of them, whose name I cannot recall at the moment because she was lost in the in the course of the history, wrote a sketch about Serbia, and you could find that that's like a dramolet, a small drama about Serbia. And but she didn't know actually about she never, I don't know, I don't have any data that she offered Jelena that she would translate her works, and she was really slow in this publication. You can see she came back from United States in 1920, and then 14 years later she published this travelogue as a book. Because mostly she was publishing in the magazines, and a lot of the whole letters from Salonika were actually published in journal Politika, and then in some magazine, and then not some very important one for Serbia. And the same thing was obviously also for but I cannot. I don't remember if these letters from the New World were all completely published in. So, but she was, I remember from that travelogue, for instance, that she was writing. She was among many women writers in Boston. She said that she was absolutely charmed by Boston, and women writers were the most important topic. And she went there to that to the place where they had some kind of a club. And then 2 years ago, I also went to that address, and believe it or not, there is not a plaque on it that this was a women writers club. And so I asked the professor from the Suffolk University, who helped me a lot. He even took me to a place where where one of the episodes in the travelogue that are important for her story happened. He said that there were many women writers clubs at the time, so that was kind of a normal thing. Yeah. So I don't see that she came to that point with anyone to help her translate. And obviously she spoke very good English, because she had no problems in understanding. And I don't know, maybe they just I don't know. I cannot explain. Cannot find it. I cannot find. I don't see in her text the wish for her to be translated into English. And besides, lingua franca at that time was French language, and she actually wrote. She wrote a volume of poems in French, which has been recently transcribed. It's also on the website. I can send you Au Soleil Couchant.
Au Soleil Couchant, oui.
Yeah. And Vladimir Đurić translated it to Serbian. So it was also taken from the manuscript. So we worked on the manuscript of her manuscript at the National Library. So you can download it right from there. So
okay.
And also
it was published in France. No, it was published in Serbia.
No, it was published last year. We published it in Serbia, and I know that she published. There is one story, her story, which she wrote first in French and then translated to Serbian. That's an interesting thing, but we didn't run into the French original, so we don't have it in French. Mm-hmm. It's just said that it was written first in French, and then because from her way, it's a story that is called Something Happened in America. And when she came back from United States, she came back to Europe. She directly, or I think she came back to Southampton, and then she went to Paris. Mm-hmm. She spent some time in Paris. So you see, she had a nice life. That's I mean, she had money obviously and could travel, and wasn't I don't know what to say about the education, but she wasn't educated in institutions. She was educated at home. Everything, you know, when you see this, what I think is this is what you get when you have the best possible, you know, conditions of life. You don't worry about money. You have a good education. You can be educated in the way you want to be. So she spoke French and English very well. And we see the traces in certain situations that she also knew Italian, Turkish, she spoke Turkish, and so on.
But publishing this book in French, it was read and commented in France?
She published a story in French. She read it. We know that she wrote, we don't know if she published the story. We know that she wrote that story in French and that she read it on some occasion in something that was like a women writers club or something like that. That's all we know. We don't know if it was published. It was originally written in French, one of her stories.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I also would like to thank the two speakers. Lovely presentations. Of course, I have heard a lot and admired Jelena Dimitrijević, especially these harem stories. I had personal interest in them, comparing the voice of the woman who is insider in the harem to the voices of the outsiders who are fantasizing the relations there. But now I would like to ask a completely different question to Biljana and also a question to Masha. So first to Masha, maybe, because she was silent during the discussion, maybe to ask her first about what she said about this Polish writer and the way her works were actually utilized by two different propaganda regimes. Do you think that this volume that you have created and the works there, the profiles of the women there, can be investigated exactly in this perspective, the way those women were actually utilized, their lives, their works, their profiles by different political agendas, by different political regimes, because this is really an outreach to something very, very common, very present, up to date, and perhaps a lesson to be learned for the future. So a very, very useful and lovely perspective in terms of what we see today. And my question to Biljana is, in fact, in a similar vein. It's about the way Jelena Dimitrijević entered the textbooks. So how many years did it take did you have special connections in the in those domains of the writers of textbooks? What was the strategy to make a woman visible in such a breakthrough in the curricula? Because this is a real breakthrough, and if you are able to sustain it, that's really what we all would crave for a lot of other women in other cultures and literatures. Thank you very much.
If I just may interfere to say that today with us are also our Polish colleagues, so perhaps they could also answer your question about the Polish writer Konopnicka. And now, please, Masha.
Yes, I was also going to ask Emilia if she wants to answer this question, and then I can try to answer it from a different context, from the Croatian context, because obviously I'm not an expert on Polish literature. So Emilia, if you want to go ahead and try to answer the question. Oh, she's here. Hi.
Oh, sorry. Excuse me. I wasn't prepared for presenting things today, but Nadezhda asked about this political agenda adjusted to women writers in the past, and oh, it is a very, very good idea, but you know, I have what can I say today about Konopnicka is that she is on the left totally. Now she's a person, a figure or a symbol of LGBT wave, and for in Poland the situation is that we have a kind of authoritarian regime now, very homophobic publicly. So many themes or many not her poetry, but Konopnicka's prose is could be read today as a very conservative way of seeing things, religion, society. But on the other hand, the fact she traveled with a friend, with a female friend, Maria Dulębianka, made her now a figure for LGBT people, and it's I know it is a very small small fact I can add to your question, but I think it's a maybe it is a kind of answer to your question about political agenda adjusted to women writers. Thank you, and sorry.
Thank you very much. Thank you. This is actually a long discussion to be held someday, in some nice place, but this is the beginning of it. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Nadezhda, for this great question. I really don't have an answer prepared, but I would like to say something about my Croatian authors in this context, because I didn't really say anything about them in my presentation. And they are so very different, and they are treated so differently in literary history. And there's Marija Jurić-Zagorka, who was always a radical, subversive figure, always fighting at the forefront for marginalized groups. And she was always a problem for all the political regimes, and nobody really wanted her. So it's really hard to appropriate her for anything. And I think that maybe contemporary feminist criticism in Croatia is appropriating her now for our own concerns. But the older political regimes didn't really want her. And I think only the popular public read her popular romances, and they have always loved her. But in a political sense, I think she was always more problematic, especially to dominant official political regimes. And only now are we talking about her politics and her political engagement. And then there's Ivana Brlić-Mažuranić, on the other hand, who was a completely different figure. And she was really respected in her time because she was an aristocratic figure. Her grandfather was a very famous Croatian politician in the 19th century. She was married and she had a lot of children, and her writing came partly from her motherhood, because she started writing stories for her children and fairy tales for her children. And then at the beginning of the 20th century, she was considered by male authors, by her contemporaries, as a model for a perfect Croatian woman writer, something that a woman writer should be, writing for children and future generations, and just being a perfect image of motherhood. And she was often compared to Zagorka. And Zagorka was criticized in comparison to Ivana Brlić-Mažuranić as a divorced woman, always politically radical, always fierce and wild. And Ivana Brlić-Mažuranić, I think, has been appropriated by conservative political sides because she was conservative partly. But then her relationship to her motherhood and to her marriage and to her writing was very complex. And I think, again, now we as feminist criticists in Croatia are trying to find an angle on how to see her as more of a feminist maybe than she really was. So I guess that we have really two different stories here. Zagorka, who can't really be appropriated by conservative politics, and then Ivana Brlić-Mažuranić, who we so dearly want to appropriate for our struggle and try to find in her autobiographical writings, especially some sort of gaps and fault lines in which we can see that she wasn't really happy with her condition, that she was severely depressed from time to time. She had postpartum depression, and then she also committed suicide in the end. So we're trying to find in these cracks, in these mental health issues, some sort of proof that she was more radical than she publicly presented. And I don't know, maybe this is another way to approach your question from the other side, appropriating someone from the perspective of progressive politics, not necessarily conservative politics. But I think this is happening with Ivana Brlić-Mažuranić in our case, that maybe we are interpreting and maybe reading more into it, I don't know, than there was. And I think we have to really be careful because I don't know, I have this impulse to do this also, but then I need to step back and maybe read more about the context she really lived in, because she was very religious and very conservative in her political values. So we have to take this into account, of course.
Oh, this is really interesting and challenging for a future research. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, I guess it's my turn. I would like to go back to my presentation. Actually, Nadia, you asked me the question. I cut my presentation, so just at the place where I cut it. So let me see if I can do it, if I can go on. This is from yes, okay. So I guess you can see this. This is a calendar for 2018, which is named the Classics of Serbian Literature. And you see who is now among the classics of the Serbian literature. Of course, this is the publishing house, which is very, very influential. I would say that one of the things that helped bringing Jelena Dimitrijević back to this wider stage is that we published 2 of her travelogues in Laguna, because that's the power of being visible. You can see that books everywhere, even in the food shops, you know, at the airports, everywhere, because they have very good distribution network. and then you start talking about, and the marketing about these books was really great in both cases. I remember, giving, I don't know how many interviews, and in almost every important newspaper there was an article about the book about Jelena Dimitrijević. So she became, all of a sudden she became kind of a celebrity, and you see she's now permanently in these calendars together with Vuk Karadžić, the reformer of the Serbian language, for instance. That's on the commercial side. And speaking about taking her into the school program, that was a joint effort which roots back to 1980s, when Svetlana Slapšak initiated and Slobodanka Peković helped, wrote the first actually prepared for the republication letters from Niš about harems. And then in 1990s, Svetlana Slapšak wrote one article which is still being cited very much. It's called Harems Nomads, where she used Rosi Braidoti's concept of the nomadic subject to show how Jelena Dimitrijević exploited, actually how how we can read her in the completely new modern light, and that she is actually the writer for this time, that she's not somebody who was writing and doesn't have anything to say to us. On the contrary. And then it started like kind of a wave, among the feminists. We should understand, first of all, that Jelena Dimitrijević was very well accepted among her contemporaries. But then after 1945, she died in April 1945, just before the war ended. And actually, she was born on March 27th in 1862. So it's tomorrow would be her birthday. So this is kind of a celebration of that fact too. But she died just before Yugoslavia became a socialist country. And in the socialist country, you would not be very popular if you came from the bourgeois background. So that was the problem with her. And then in the 80s, Svetlana Slapšak felt in a way that it was time to go back to this important woman and to do something with it. So she was at the Institute for the Literature and Art and initiated that first republication, and then it started slowly. And if you're asking me how the project Niženstvo itself took part in it, yes, we were important part of it, but we didn't know that this would happen because it wasn't us who decided about that. I think that the idea was within the project, and it was my idea, that we should put stress on one woman writer to see how we can break through, how we can break into the canon. And I think that we chose smartly this to be Jelena Dimitrijević. And of course, we do work about other women writers, many women writers, but she is the one we focused on for that reason, and it worked out. And for that, we can say thank you to the women, of course, who were responsible for this, who offered both of her travelogues that I showed you, the one to United States and the one around the world. But at that time, that was 2 years ago, the travelogue from the United States has not yet been reprinted, so it was decided that it would be only this first part, of course, published by this publishing house. Then I want to show you something else now, how it goes with other things. Now she's becoming a popular figure. This is one of the books about important women, published by Kreativni Centar. That's a publishing house with very good reputation about children's books and other books. So this is the illustration of Jelena Dimitrijević. And such books have become popular in Serbia. There is another one similar to the, in a way, you know, it's also for the girls. So Jelena Dimitrijević, you can see The World Traveler. And there was another one, which was the translation. I cannot find it. Oh yeah, that's a translation of this book. This book, you probably have it in your own language, about for the little rebellion girls or something like that.
Yes.
So in Serbian version, I think that Hillary Clinton was taken out, and I was asked to write something about one woman from Serbia. I said Jelena Dimitrijević, of course, and you can see this. She's like Phileas Fogg in this interpretation. And this was published in a very popular magazine for the readers of all generations. So she has become a kind of celebrity. And the only recipe I can say is work, 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 and work, and press it, and have a good publisher with good marketing and good distribution. So this happened to us, and it's not it was not out of the blue. We worked on that. So that's it.
Thank you very much, Biljana. It's a recipe of 90% work and also some, I mean, and then more percent, for example, I don't know, luck or something else, but it's work, really work, and good constellation of factors. So this publishing marketing strategy, it's really so crucial. But without your interviews, without all these publications, it wouldn't have been so successful. So it's really a great contribution of the project Niženstvo and of the past experience of women's feminist criticism, Slavšek and the others. Thanks. Great experience, great story.
Thank you.
Thank you all for these really interesting questions and also your profound answers. And do we have anybody else who would like to say something, to raise a question or comment upon what has been said so far? Or are we tired and it is Friday evening? So then I would like to conclude, but before concluding, I would like to ask Masha to announce our next webinar, which will be in 4 weeks, I think.
Yes, in 4 weeks, it's time for my webinar. And I'm not exactly sure of the title, but it was something about the relationship of high culture and popular culture concerning women authors in Croatia at the beginning of the 20th century. I have a more concise title, but I just can't remember it now. But Katja will send you all the news, and it will be in 4 weeks on Friday at 6 o'clock, like this one. So I would be glad to see you then.
Thank you very much. So I hope to see you in 4 weeks. Thank you for joining us today, and enjoy the rest of the evening. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you, Katja and Matea.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you very much.